She paid $2,300 for that first-class seat. She had every right to be there. But the moment she settled in, something shifted in the cabin. The flight attendant's eyes lingered just a little too long. The smile that greeted other passengers never came her way. And when she politely asked for a glass of water, everything erupted. What happened next wasn't just shocking. It was caught on camera, went viral within hours, and exposed a truth that luxury and success can't always protect you from. The flight attendant had no idea who she had just humiliated, and when the truth came out, it shattered more than just one career. This is what happened 30,000 feet in the air, where no one could look away. Judge Margaret Chen had earned every single thing in her life. The daughter of immigrants who ran a small grocery store in Queens, she'd worked her way through community college, then law school, clerking late into the night while her classmates partied. 23 years later, she sat on the federal bench in the Southern District of New York, one of the most respected judges in the circuit. She'd presided over cases that made headlines, handled corruption trials, immigration disputes and civil rights violations. But despite the black robe and the gavel and the honorable before her name, Margaret had learned something that still stung. Respect wasn't always guaranteed outside the courtroom. That Tuesday morning, she was flying to San Francisco for a judicial conference. She'd splurged on first class, a rare indulgence after a brutal month of back-to-back trials. She deserved it. She'd dressed comfortably. Jeans, a simple sweater, her reading glasses perched on her head. No suit, no briefcase screaming, "important person here." Just a woman looking forward to a quiet flight, a good book and maybe a decent meal at cruising altitude. She boarded early, settling into seat 2A by the window. The cabin was pristine, soft leather, warm lighting, that hushed atmosphere that comes with expensive tickets. She pulled out her book, exhaled, and felt her shoulders finally relax. Other passengers filed in behind her. The businessman in 1C got a warm greeting. The elderly couple in 3D received help with their luggage and genuine smiles. But when Margaret glanced up, she noticed something. The flight attendant, a woman in her 40s with blonde hair pulled back tight, kept looking her way. Not the welcoming look other passengers received. Something else, something colder. Margaret told herself she was imagining it. She went back to her book. But deep down, she felt it. That familiar prickle of unease. Something was about to go very wrong. 20 minutes into the flight, Margaret pressed the call button. Simple request, just a glass of water. The flight attendant appeared within seconds, but the warmth she'd shown other passengers had vanished entirely. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes swept over Margaret with something that looked almost like disgust. "Can I help you?" The words were clipped, cold. "Just some water, please." "When you have a moment." The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at the passengers across the aisle, white, well-dressed, clearly comfortable. Then back to Margaret. "We're preparing for takeoff." "You'll have to wait." Margaret nodded, confused. They hadn't even pushed back from the gate yet. Other passengers were still getting drinks, getting settled. But she let it go. Maybe the woman was having a bad day. Maybe she was stressed. Margaret opened her book again, trying to shake off the unease crawling up her spine. But it didn't stop there. When the flight attendant returned to the front of first class, Margaret heard her. Talking to another crew member, voice just loud enough to carry. "I don't know how she afforded first class. Probably used miles or something." The other attendant glanced Margaret's way, then quickly looked down. The businessman in 1C got his whiskey. The couple in 3D got their champagne. Margaret got nothing. She felt her face grow hot. That old familiar anger, the kind that came with years of being underestimated, overlooked, questioned in spaces where she'd earned her place 10 times over. She'd felt it in law school when professors assumed she was there on affirmative action. She'd felt it in courtrooms when attorneys talked over her before realizing who she was. And now, 30,000 feet in the air, she was feeling it again. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, Margaret stood. She walked calmly to the galley where the flight attendant was arranging. Meals, professional, controlled, years on the bench had taught her how to manage her composure even when fury was boiling underneath. "Excuse me. I asked for water about 40 minutes ago." The flight attendant turned, and for a split second something flashed across her face. Annoyance. Maybe even contempt. "I told you to wait." I did wait. I'm asking politely. Maybe you should have stayed in your seat. The words hung in the air. Other passengers were watching now. Margaret could feel their eyes. The businessman had lowered his newspaper. The elderly woman in 3D had stopped mid-conversation. And Margaret knew she knew what was happening. She'd seen it in depositions, in testimony, in cases she'd ruled on. The subtle shift, the line being crossed. I paid for this seat, Margaret said quietly. Just like everyone else here. I'm entitled to the same service. The flight attendant stepped closer. Too close, invading space in a way that felt deliberate, aggressive. You need to go back to your seat now. Margaret didn't move. Couldn't move, because she understood in that moment that nothing she said would matter. Not her tone, not her reason, not the truth. This woman had already decided who Margaret was the second she'd seen her face, and then it happened. Fast, shocking. The flight attendant's hand came up and struck Margaret clean across the face. The crack echoed through the cabin. Passengers gasped. Someone screamed, and Margaret stood there stunned, her cheek burning, her mind trying to process what had just occurred. She'd been slapped, in first class, on a commercial flight, in front of dozens of witnesses. The flight attendant's face had gone pale, but her voice was still defiant. You were being aggressive. You need to sit down before I have you removed. Margaret's hand touched her cheek. She felt the sting, the humiliation, the rage. But more than anything, she felt something else, a cold, calculating clarity. Because this woman had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and she had no idea the cabin erupted. Passengers were on their feet, shouting. The businessman from 1C was already recording on his phone. The elderly woman in 3D was demanding to speak to the captain. Someone yelled, "She just hit her!" Did you see that? Another voice, "Call the police!" The flight attendant stumbled backward, her confidence cracking as she realized what she'd done, and that it had been witnessed by an entire cabin of people. Margaret stood frozen, her hand still pressed to her burning cheek. The humiliation was overwhelming. Not just the physical assault, but the why behind it. She'd spent her entire career fighting for dignity, for justice, for the belief that the law protected everyone equally. And in one moment, on a plane she'd paid good money to board, she'd been reduced to nothing. Seen as a threat, treated as less than human, slapped like she had no right to exist in that space. The head flight attendant rushed forward, face pale with panic. What happened here? Her eyes darted between Margaret and her colleague, clearly trying to assess the damage, the liability, the nightmare unfolding in first class. Margaret's voice came out steady, but underneath it was steel. Your crew member just assaulted me, in front of witnesses. I want her name, her employee number, and I want the captain informed immediately. The flight attendant who'd struck her tried to speak, voice shaking now. She was being aggressive, she wouldn't sit down, I felt threatened. The businessman from 1C stepped forward, phone still recording. She asked for water. I watched the whole thing. You ignored her, insulted her, and then you hit her. I've got it all on video. The color drained from the flight attendant's face. The reality was sinking in. The phones, the witnesses, the undeniable truth playing out in real time. She'd assaulted a passenger, and there was no way to spin it, no way to lie her way out. Margaret finally spoke again, and this time her voice carried the weight of 23 years on the federal bench. My name is Judge Margaret Chen, United States District Court, Southern District of New York, and you just committed assault on a federal officer. The flight attendant's legs nearly gave out. The head attendant grabbed the seat back for support. The cabin went deathly silent, because everyone understood in that instant this wasn't just a viral video waiting to happen. This was a crime, a federal crime, and the woman who'd thrown that slap had just destroyed her entire life. The plane never took off. Within minutes, airport police boarded the aircraft. The flight attendant was escorted off in handcuffs, still trying to explain, still insisting she'd felt threatened by a woman who'd simply asked for water. The video, captured by multiple passengers, went viral within hours. Millions watched as a federal judge was slapped, humiliated, and assaulted for the crime of existing in first class while Asian American. The airline issued an apology. The flight attendant was terminated and later charged with assault on a federal officer. But for Margaret, the damage was already done. She gave one interview afterward, calm, measured, precise, the way she always was. But her words cut deep. I've spent my entire career upholding the law, fighting for justice, ensuring that everyone, regardless of who they are, gets treated with dignity. And yet on that plane, none of it mattered. My credentials didn't matter. My profession didn't matter. All that woman saw was my face, and she decided I didn't belong. The incident sparked national conversation, op-eds, think pieces, debates about implicit bias, about who gets believed, about who gets respect in spaces that were never designed for them. Some people were outraged. Others made excuses, claimed Margaret must have done something to provoke it, insisted it wasn't about race. But the video didn't lie. The witnesses didn't lie. And the truth, uncomfortable, undeniable, was laid bare for everyone to see. Margaret returned to the bench 2 weeks later. Same courtroom, same gavel, same black robe that commanded respect within those four walls. But something had shifted inside her. She'd always known that dignity was fragile, that bias was real, that even power and position couldn't fully shield you. But now she'd lived it in the most public, painful way possible. Here's the question we need to ask ourselves. If a federal judge, educated, accomplished, respected, can be treated this way, what does that say about everyone else? The people without titles, without cameras recording, without the power to fight back. How many others have been slapped down, dismissed, humiliated in moments no one will ever see? And how many more times will this keep happening before we finally admit that respect in this country still depends too much on the color of your skin? This wasn't just Margaret's story. It's America's, and it's far from over.